So in your in the title of your book, and I'm assuming this is for a very specific reason, you chose to use the word white.
Yes.
So can we talk for a minute about um, how race plays a role in this?
Yeah. So, evangelicals themselves will often not talk about race explicitly. Again, theirs is just Christianity. Their beliefs are just biblical, and so it can be hard to have conversations about race with white evangelicals. History makes that a little easier, where it can show just how important whiteness is, this category of whiteness, in understanding the tradition. And so I use the word white evangelical very intentionally because, again, there are different ways of defining evangelicals. And a popular way that evangelical leaders like to use, the National Association of Evangelicals will use this theological rubric, like, right? So you uphold the authority of the scriptures, believe in, conversion, crucicentrism, so placing the atonement of Christ at the center, and then activism. So there you have it. So if you use that rubric, you can put all kinds of people into that evangelical category, right? Most global Protestants, evangelical. Most Black Protestants in the United States, you could put into that category of evangelical. But now the problem is the vast majority of Black Protestants in the United States do not identify as evangelical, right? Because they are aware that there is more to evangelicalism than just a theological rubric, much more. They're aware, again, of this social and cultural tradition. And so I wanted to describe this particular group, people who self-identify as evangelicals. I also define evangelicalism according to what they consume, right? It's this consumer culture. And so I'm talking about the importance of Christian radio, of Christian publishing, of these networks that I've mapped out. And those are, with few exceptions, predominantly white communities, white Christian communities. So if you're looking at, who attends church together, who listens to what radio programming and things like that, I'm talking about in this book, a predominantly white community. And that's really important. And then you start looking at some of their ideas. So I was just mentioning Christian nationalism, right? Christian nationalism on the surface for white evangelicals does not seem to be about race at all. They will deny that it is about race. But if you just sit for a moment with this narrative of America was once a Christian nation, right? Originally, and everything was wonderful, great. And then at some point things went wrong. And now usually that point is the 1960s. That's when things went really wrong, right? Now that only makes sense if you are a white person, right? That makes absolutely no sense. So again, like the whiteness is there. The white racial identity is forming this, but it's only being kind of packaged and sold as this is just truth. It's just Christianity. It's just Christian America. And so this book is about white evangelicals. That's what this book is about. Every once in a while, I'll hear from a critic who accuses me of being racist by using that adjective in the title, which is, as a historian, it's purely descriptive here. These are the people I'm talking about.
Let's jump into Trump. So your book was published in June, correct?
Yes.
It probably was finished much further back in time before that. So a lot has happened since you stopped writing. There was COVID, and evangelicals followed Trump straight into the rebellion and disobedience of the COVID protocols. Even so, in your book, you do mention a few times, like there are a lot of evangelicals who found it strange that they were in this place with Trump that they were in, yet they tried to reelect him an astonishing rate, even higher than the last time in November. And then if this does not prove your thesis, I don't know what could, and that is January 6th.
Yeah.
And that just, with the militantism and all of that stuff, that just is the nail in the coffin. And it really kind of brings everything together. So since you've written this book, and you take a look at culture and all these things that have been going on, what are some other thoughts that you have regarding some of those events?
Yeah, you're right. I finished the book almost a year before it released. And so that was a long year of watching and waiting. We went through Trump's impeachment. We had the onset of COVID, and then all the anti-masking, and we had the Black Lives Matter movement, right, resurgence. We had, Trump holding up that Bible after violently clearing protesters in front of the White House at St. John's Church. We had Eric Metaxas throwing a sucker punch. We had a lot. Oh, and Jerry Falwell Jr.'s fall from grace, and right, there was a lot. I had a lot of opportunities to write op-eds. Let's put it that way. And so it was honestly, it was this very strange experience to feel each time kind of affirmed as, hey, I got the story right. And then horrified with each new iteration to see that I'd gotten this story right. Because when you're writing a book like this, you have a lot of evidence. You're looking for patterns, you're putting the pieces together, and then that's it. You kind of send it off into the world and you see how it holds up. And so the writer in me was very happy that it was holding up exceedingly well. But the citizen and human in me was honestly, horrified over and over again. I think, the around the election, well, first, even last summer with, even before that, right, the COVID, the resistance to kind of COVID measures, the militancy, particularly led by a number of white evangelical pastors there to resist health recommendations, the resistance to racial justice in the wake of the killing of George Floyd, right? All of that really was just deeply troubling, even if I could explain it. Each iteration was distressing, and then the unwillingness to accept the results of the election was deeply troubling. One of the things that I had seen in my research that honestly I hadn't been expecting to see when I embarked on this project was just how anti-democratic many of the impulses are within white evangelical teachings, ideas of authority and submission and of God-appointed authorities, and when you need to play by the rules and when you don't need to play by the rules. I was kind of startled by that. And so I thought that didn't bode well for our democratic norms and institutions. And then, of course, the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol was deeply disturbing. And I'm still kind of sorting that out. On the one hand, the vast majority of white evangelicals were not storming the Capitol. And many people who were not white evangelicals were among those who were. And at the same time, right, the symbolism, I listened to the prayer, there was the prayer offered on the floor of the Senate. There's also this prayer offered by Proud Boys on their way to the Capitol. And if you listen to that, it sounds exactly like any prayer that could be offered in any evangelical church on any given Sunday, right? I saw the posters, I saw the arm patches of, the armor of God. And I saw one poster which was Braveheart and a picture of William Wallace with a face of Donald Trump on it, right? And so the signs were there, the affinities were there. What I have been very attentive to is trying to understand where kind of the mainstream evangelicals are ending up on these issues, right? The ones who weren't storming the Capitol. What are they thinking? Some are condemning it. Many were first saying, oh, this is Antifa, right? Because that's what Franklin Graham was saying. So that's what they're saying. Then I saw a lot of course, we don't condone violence, but, and then really justifying the grievances. And that's something that does give me pause. It is something that I keep my eye on. And it's something that I do find disturbing simply because I know the teachings that they have, that so many evangelicals have been immersed in for so long. It does give me, cause to, not necessarily for alarm, but for caution here.
What do and this is, I know you're a historian, and so, but I'd like your opinion on this. what do you think that what advice would you give evangelical leaders to sort of reorient themselves?
Yeah. I do find myself in an unusual place right now as a historian. I didn't anticipate that I would be asked this question so frequently by evangelical leaders themselves. And some of the advice that I give, with the caveat that, yes, I'm a historian, so I might not know what I'm talking about. But I one of the things that I observed through this research were just the power dynamics within evangelical organizations and institutions. That there is so much deference required within evangelical organizations and communities, right? Deference to the God-appointed authorities, and you do not question, or if you do question, you stay quiet about it. You don't want to disrupt the witness of the ministry of the church, right? This is rhetoric that we need unity, and what that ends up doing is just bolstering the voices of those who already wield the most power, and it can have devastating consequences in the case of abuse of power or sexual abuse, right? And that's the whole last chapter of the book kind of outlines that in really disturbing ways, but I think more broadly too. And so right now, I know that there are many evangelicals in their churches, communities, organizations, colleges, schools, who are deeply troubled by racism, by Christian nationalism, which they see as an idolatry, who were very troubled by evangelical support for Donald Trump, right? We talk about the 81%, that leaves 19% of white evangelicals who are in opposition to that to a certain extent. But then what happens within these organizations is this kind of culture of deference or then fear. And if you speak out against these powers, right, you will lose your job. Many people know that. Pastors have lost their positions. So many people are reaching out to me explaining their predicaments of if they speak out, this is the consequences, and they are shown the door, or they just willingly walk away because they know it's just a matter of time. And so when I talk to evangelical leaders, really one of the biggest things I say is like, this is the time for courage, right? We talk about it a lot. All of us, wherever we find ourselves, need to speak truth now. And we need to do so whatever the consequences, right? Within our organizations, with respect to our donors, our constituents, that we need to be speaking truth, because for far too long, far too many Christians have muzzled themselves or allowed themselves to be muzzled. And what that means is that the cost could be very high for some. And at the same time, that it just has to be done. And then on the other side of things, maybe new institutions, or maybe the cost won't be so high, and maybe leadership can actually change things. I don't know, but there's just been way too many leaders squandering their authority, squandering their actual leadership. So that's one of the things that I try to say when evangelical leaders ask me what they should do right now.
Yeah, I think also with when you mentioned power, that really resonated with me, because I think that there's some responsibility on the layperson too, to really stop and evaluate what they're taking in, like who they're listening to, who they trust, and just to start taking responsibility for their actions, instead of they have this herd mentality usually. They're going with what their church says or the group says, and so. I don't know how you change power like that, but I definitely resonate with that. Thank you so much for being with us today. Your book is incredible. Jesus and John Wayne. Thank you so much, Kristin. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.